Hey guys, if you've been with me through this series, welcome to the final episode of Who the Fuck is My Rabbi? What a journey we have taken. We've looked at so many things. We looked at Gaffney's background, we unpacked spiritual abuse and symbolic protection, we learned about spiritual bypassing and accountability. And today we're going back to where it all began, the Radical Monogamy podcast episode, the episode that sparked 1,000 conversations. If you're just finding this video, I'd recommend going and checking out the first two parts of this series. I think it will just be much more interesting for you, and this conversation will certainly make a lot more sense. But if you'd like to stay regardless, you should still be able to keep up, and you can always circle back a little bit later on. Our goal or our theme for the conversation today, or for our conversation today, is to try and see if we can add a little bit more nuance to the arguments that are being made by the Aubrey constellation. And in general, we just want to see what this all looks like now that we have more context and a more fuller picture. I actually have a small theory about what I think is going on, but I'm going to share that with you a bit later to get your thoughts on it. And before we dive in, I'll just say again really quickly that I don't have an issue with polyamory. I'm monogamous myself, but what consenting adults do in their bedrooms and with their relationships is really none of my business. This whole journey, the three-part series, this was a response to noticing that when the Radical Monogamy episode first dropped, that Aubrey was deleting comments relating to Mark Gaffney. Anybody who had questions, concerns related to Mark Gaffney, their comments were being deleted. My comments were also deleted. And in general, there was just seemed to be a very loud silence surrounding Mark Gaffney's presence in this episode. So that's what prompted me to embark on this big odyssey. And since the podcast has aired, I know that Aubrey has made a couple more videos that were responses to the backlash, but I'm not familiar if any of those talk about Gaffney and address people's concerns. I have seen a little bit of them, but admittedly, I haven't really paid them that much attention because I've been doing this. But if you saw anything, if he does talk about Gaffney, please drop a comment and share what you've heard, because it would, quite frankly, it would be not just lovely, but it would also be a huge relief to see that, or to hear that he didn't just dismiss people's concerns and try to move forward like nothing happened. The commentary today, our conversation is going to be, well, I feel like I'm a lot more direct in parts of this because, to be perfectly upfront, after this whole series, I feel like I've lost a little bit of patience. It's gotten a little bit thinner. So there's definitely times where I feel like I'm more direct. And I think in general, it's just a little bit more tongue in cheek, because circling back to this episode after everything, I mean, there are definitely parts in this where it feels like you either gotta laugh or cry. So I'm trying to laugh and maybe poke fun a little bit more where I can. And, really before we get stuck into it, the final word, as always, all of these conversations that we have, they're all about, the whole purpose is to increase self-awareness so that we can get better at taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other and protecting our communities. Radio, let's dive in.
Podcast that is going to be shocking for some of y'all. It's going to be stimulating for many of y'all. It's going to raise a lot of questions. And the reason is that I am here with my beloved wife, Ilana, which many of you who follow me on social media or have listened to our podcast have met and love. And we're also here with beloved Alana, who is a part of our relationship constellation and shares a deep love with both myself and Ilana in their own unique qualities. And we're also here with my beloved and esteemed teacher, Rebbe, Dr. Mark Gaffney, who's helped us navigate what this all means, how we're going.
So, this podcast is airing a little over 2 years now after the Healing the Wounds of Culture episode that we just watched. And there has been a little subtle change. Did you catch that Gaffney is now being introduced as Aubrey's beloved and esteemed Rebbe? So I had to do a little bit of homework on this one. And what I found is that in Judaism, a Rebbe isn't just a teacher, They're a spiritual guide that you model your life after. And oh man, does that hit differently now. Also, from what I learned, all rebbes are rabbis, but not all rabbis are rebbes. Try saying that 5 times fast. And please correct me if I've got that wrong or expand anywhere that feels like it needs more information. And as we very well know by now, Gafni's ordinations were publicly revoked. So calling him a Rebbe here is immediately misleading to anybody who watches. I know I was misled the first time I watched this. I didn't know who Gafni was, so I just took it at face value and thought, well, I guess he's a pretty big fancy rabbi that they're chatting with.
How we're going to not only live in this moment to moment, but to create something that is pointing towards one possibility in the future of relationships. Relationships that, as we know, if you look at the statistics, there's staggering percentages of infidelity. There's staggering and disappointing numbers that come from statistics and studies about the decline of eros inside relationship containers.
So it feels like with our introduction, we're being set up for a big grand adventure with a shocking reveal. And spoiler alert, the reveal turns out to be that Aubrey and Vailana opened up their marriage. In the tidal wave of critical feedback to this episode, I did see that there was a percentage of people who were not happy that they have become poly because they don't support poly relationships in and of themselves. But I think at least what I saw, the majority of people, they were expressing a lot of concern for Vailana and Alana. And the shock really seemed to come from a sense of betrayal because apparently Aubrey and Vailana publicly were presenting as being somewhat more traditionally monogamous. And they were quite literally selling monogamy, divine union, giving courses, this kind of thing. And people were looking up to them as great role models and a great example of what does a really loving, spiritually rich, monogamous marriage look like. So for many, it actually wasn't a pleasant it wasn't a pleasant surprise to discover that behind the scenes, they had been opening up their marriage. And I feel like that's pretty reasonable. I'm sure that if I was in that position, I would find this episode to be quite jarring. It makes a bit of sense.
And so people are looking for different options. What are they? Do they work? Is it possible? And for some people, the traditional models, monogamy as it has been for thousands of years, just works perfectly. And so we're not here to be advocates of our way, but we're here to just humbly tell the story of our way. And the reality is that we didn't plan to be here. This was not like we set out with this intention. We arrived at this intention through a variety of choices and mystical interventions and just the acceptance of what is. And what is has really guided us to where we are now. And where we are now is a story that we have not yet told. And so here we are to tell the story and also tell the story in the context of a world, a planet that's really.
So here, based on just, some points we were just talking about, it feels like it would have been much more respectful to their audience if they had have just been super transparent and upfront and taken much more ownership. So, for example, if Aubrey here had have said something along the lines of, I married a monogamous woman. I thought that I wanted monogamy as well, but as our relationship progressed, I began to realize that that wasn't for me. I changed my mind, and this is how we navigated that, and this is where we've arrived. The expectation, though, I mean, there's a buzz of excitement in this podcast opening, and the sense I get is when people watch this, they're gonna be wowed, they're gonna be shocked, but overall, they're gonna be on board and celebrate with us. And I feel like it's a little naive maybe or a little presumptuous, and it reads as maybe lacking some self-awareness or some understanding of the connection that you have with people and what they are responding to and connecting to you with. Because if you have known someone to be a certain way, and then you discover that they've been misleading you for years, most people aren't gonna celebrate with you because they're gonna see that as a deception, particularly when it's being handled the way that the Aubrey constellation are handling this conversation, the opening of this conversation.
To suggest that there's this new optimal form of relationship which we are proselytizing for. Joseph Smith starting Mormonism. Nothing of the kind. So one. Two, for most people, most of the time, classical monogamy, and I say classical monogamy, is probably the best road and not a simple one. Because actually, in this kind of classical monogamy vision, everyone envisions classical monogamy as this, perfect man and woman, first off, right? Heteronormative.
So, next we get into monogamy and cheating, but not polyamory, oddly. All we get is that throwaway line from Gaffney about Joseph Smith, and I find it that it is so telling that it's Gaffney who catches that connection and then grabs it and then quickly throws it away before anybody else can pick it up. Then Gaffney spins out these very confusing definitions of monogamy. He kind of makes it seem like it's a broken system. And then notice that he has this way of being able to say something negative, but make it sound positive.
This path for most people, most of the time, is filled with holy and broken hallelujahs. And the reason why Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah has more covers made of it than any other story is because it's about, wow, love is not a victory march, right? It's a cold and it's a broken, it's a holy and broken hallelujah, right? Meaning it's not simple. There's agony, there's ecstasy, there's pain, there's abandonment, there's trauma. So monogamy itself is a beautiful and gorgeous journey.
So there he's describing monogamy and he's saying it's not simple. There's agony, there's ecstasy, there's pain, there's abandonment, there's trauma. So monogamy itself is a beautiful and gorgeous journey. I mean, it sure sounds like it, especially when you describe it like that. We're barely 10 minutes into this, and we've already heard about how much infidelity there is with monogamy, how terrible these relationships are because they are full of shame and trauma and deception. But it's sort of hard to really notice that because it's a soft feeling as opposed to a strong top of mind conscious thought. And that's because they're talking about this with such lightness and acceptance. We're also at the same time hearing things like this is what's right for most people and has been what's right for most people for thousands of years. But then you look closely at the words and there seem to be some incongruency because the words don't feel like they're actually matching the vibe. And in general, I just find the definitions here to be a little bit convoluted. So just to simplify things, classical monogamy means one person for life. Modern monogamy, which is monogamy as we would know it, or referred to as serial monogamy by people like Esther Perel, this means one partner at a time. And then we have ethical non monogamy or polyamory, which is where you have consensual relationships with more than one person. And I will admit that most of this is new to me. I have mates that have been in open relationships, but I never really thought too much about the mechanics of how it all works. So here is what I've learned that I'm going to share with you in case you never thought about it much too, and then we can go forward with a little bit of clarity. So, how do polyamorous relationships work? Some polyamorous relationships are hierarchical, so one relationship will take priority over the others, and other polyamorous relationships are equal. Everybody is on the same level and the same footing. In a hierarchical scenario, one person might have a primary and a secondary partner. So, the primary partner, this is the person who you marry or you have your kids with and who you live with. And then you can have a secondary partner. It's not going to be this structure for all relationships, but it can be that you have a secondary partner. And this is somebody who's also incredibly important, but maybe not as intertwined with your life. So maybe you don't share finances, you don't have kids together, you don't live together, kind of thing. I think from observing this radical episode that that they're in a hierarchical polyamorous relationship with Vailana being the primary, but also feel free to, expand on these concepts, or if you, as somebody who is very familiar with poly, you are polyamorous, I would absolutely love to hear. Actually, I would really love to hear your perspective on what you think this dynamic or how you think this dynamic is working. Because as I keep banging on about, the whole purpose of this is to learn more so that we can take better care of each other. And particularly in a situation like this, we don't want to be bamboozled by spiritual language. We want to try and understand what's actually going on. So, your thoughts and perspectives are absolutely welcome and appreciated.
Side of the lines without telling anyone, which means that there's a fundamental lack of safety in the container because there's a fundamental deception at play, which is hidden every day. And it takes an enormous amount of energy to keep hiding it because you got to keep hiding it every day. You got to keep making sure it's not discovered. And then, of course, you know about it, so you feel shamed. And your essential shame is this experience that if everybody really knew what was going on, if they really knew where my mind, heart, and body were playing, whether in the palace of the real or the palace of the imagination, they wouldn't actually love me or honor me the way they do. So therefore, I feel like a fraud. So there's an imposter phenomena. You have a place where 65 to 70% of the population of the classical, let's say, Western world for now, but it's true also in the Eastern blocs, actually live in shame, an essential fundamental shame, which means that we have to, right? Not that I made a mistake, I am a mistake, right? Is a devastating planet. That's a planet which becomes rife with war, starvation, abuse. So that's part one. That's just kind of frame one, just have that frame.
This is my favorite thing about this whole thing. This is probably the only thing that I genuinely enjoy because it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. It's so much fun. So essentially, we go from talking about how most people cheat in monogamous relationships, and we arrive at this is why we have world wars, abuse, and starvation. That's frame one. That's the first frame. And then I actually had to create a map to really follow along and see and track how this goes. I can share it if anybody's interested. It was quite fun. And then we have the second frame in Gaffney's words, and the second frame seems to be there to back up the first point about the horrific issues that come from living with deception. Because by this logic, if you are in a monogamous relationship, you are by definition living with deception. So it would seem actually that the antidote to war, to starvation is polyamory. Who knew? Who would have thought? And I just personally want to take this moment now to say, thank you to everybody who has already been doing their part for world peace, who's already out there engaged in a poly relationship. Thank you so much. Isn't it ridiculous? This is what I'm talking about. Actually, this is a good segue into what I think is happening here, my personal theory. So I feel like the point of sharing these frames or these frameworks is to illustrate that this new relationship configuration, well, new to them, poly's super old, but this new relationship configuration, it's not just about them. It's not just about Aubrey, Vailana, and Alana. They are not simply regular human beings who are trying to figure out how do you make it work when one person in the marriage wants to be open and the other person prefers to be monogamous. No, they are navigating this challenge for a much higher purpose. They are here to model a new way to love. So, my little theory for how Gaffney got everybody on board with this relationship dynamic is that by playing on their desire to do good and the excitement of being able to change the world, the Aubrey constellation were drawn into a situation that they aren't quite comfortable with, specifically Vailana, and I think also to some extent Alana. And all of their suffering can be bypassed in pursuit of, this thing that is so much greater than themselves. And Gaffney, in my opinion, throughout this episode, he does, a really wonderful job of reminding everybody that this is no ordinary relationship. They are here to serve humanity. And if you want to serve humanity, you have to be in a configuration like this. And whether he does that for the sole purpose of, getting us as the audience on board, if it's to reinforce to the team, uh, why they're in this constellation, that part I'm not quite certain of, to be honest. I do feel like my gut sense is that it's both. It's a little bit of both, but it is more so for the Aubrey constellation than it is for us as the audience. So that's my theory. Note what you see in here as we go through, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this perspective. Maybe there's something I've missed. Maybe there's something that you spotted that feels very crucial to this.
All three of you. You know, Alana, Vailana, Aubrey, I'm crazy proud of you because all three of you have said, we want to live with integrity. We want to live without deception. We want to live without artifice. We want to live without cheating, without lying. We want to live in a full, profound authenticity and grace. And we want to do it not just for ourselves. We want to do it for the sake of the evolution of love.
I get a really weird feeling about or from Gaffney's pride. I mean, I do understand that he's the elder in this situation, so maybe it's not that weird that he has this sort of grandfatherly pride with them. But I think what makes it feel weird to me is that it feels like it infantilizes the group. It feels like it trivializes what they've gone through because they're just these rascally kids. And I don't like that at all because it completely dismisses the very real pain that Vailana and possibly even Alana has experienced. And especially when he talks about, not having stakes in outcome, I think he's trying to convey that, he was neutral and he wasn't pushing any kind of agenda, which I don't know, are you protesting too much? But, that because he doesn't have an agenda, he has no skin in the game, so he's just a neutral figure. But I don't know, it just that feeling comes back to me again of a fox that's talked his way into a chicken coop.
We'll keep a semblance of chronology here as we kind of tell the story. And the story really begins with me recognizing fundamentally that I was unwilling to actually be in deception. And that I had a thriving wild stallion of Eros that desired, different experiences.
Aubrey, darling Aubrey, here talks about his desire for openness as his stallion. And okay, very romantic, sure, but it does put distance between Aubrey and his choices. And I think what inflamed a lot of criticism to this podcast was that type of language because okay, it sounds poetic and he is a poet, but it very subtly sets him apart from others. He's not just an ordinary man who's succumbing to the lust that's typical of all men. His is something much grander, and that feels a little bit like spiritual superiority. But more importantly for me, when we abstract desire into metaphor like this, it becomes really hard to take responsibility for it because again, you're distancing yourself from it. So I think here something that would have landed much better with people and connected because it's much more relatable would have been to say something along the lines of, you know what, at the end of the day, I love being open and I'm sexually adventurous and I just didn't want to cheat on my partner. I wanted to be faithful to her. And that's relatable. I mean, I think most people could, even if it's not your style, you could okay say, okay, fair enough, I can understand that.
But through this whole process, I was always honest. There was nothing that I ever did that wasn't in the clear light of day. And despite the conflict and the challenges that arose, it was honest and I could live with that. And, there were other challenges, but there was something that was at peace.
So really quickly, because they bang on about truth and honesty and always being honest and always doing things in daylight so much in this podcast. I think there's a little PSA that we could do here. And being honest does not mean that you're being kind, generous, or even a good partner. It doesn't mean that you are respecting your partner's needs or even listening to them. You can be a dick and be honest at the same time. Both of those things can be true and happening together. It's like that old saying, honesty without kindness is cruelty. And that's something I feel is noticeably absent when they talk about truth, at least for me, that I'm like, where's the compassion? I can hear a lot of, okay, I'm honest, but I can't really see or feel where the compassion is that should be going next to that should be complementing that honesty. And then his point about fidelity and everybody cheating, I think it skips a really relevant question, which is why do people cheat and how? I hate to give Gaffney credit, but to his credit, he does touch on a little bit earlier that cheating can take many forms. But coming from Aubrey, it's being presented as being exclusively about sex. And that's fine. I get the feeling that that's probably just how Aubrey defines it is cheating is about sex for him. Um, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that in this situation, we might want to be a bit more expansive and get a fuller picture because cheating, it's not just a matter of sexual contact. For some people, for example, a work wife can be seen as a form of emotional cheating. Liking somebody's photos on social media can feel like a betrayal. And irony of ironies, cheating also happens in polyamory too. It's not strictly a monogamy issue. So the nuance that is being missed here is why do people risk ruining a happy home? And there are a whole variety of reasons for that. And these reasons are really valid. They don't justify cheating and they don't negate the pain that comes from being betrayed, but there are a lot of reasons that people do this. It can be attachment wounds, trauma patterns, shame around sex and asking for what you want, or even knowing what it is that you want. For example, imagine that you are somebody who has grown up in a very conservative household. Nobody talks about sex or about bodies. There's a lot of shame, stigmas, taboos there. And you might be somebody who would genuinely thrive in a polyamorous relationship. Then you become an adult, you're not quite sure what to do with your desires and your feelings or how to connect with them or explore them. Going poly feels too woo and too weird and out there. So you do the more socially acceptable thing, which is to cheat, because that is more in your realm of understanding. Again, doesn't validate it, doesn't make it okay, but we can understand that it's not that straightforward. There are also other reasons that a person might cheat, like for example, disconnection, boredom, longing, working a soul crushing job that kills your desire, and then there is this office romance that sparks a feeling of aliveness, and that's the first time you felt alive in years. And again, it doesn't make it okay, but there's more to it. There's more to this story than what's being discussed here. And I bring all of this up because I think that this throwaway story about everybody cheating and then backing it up with the statistics, which are real stats, I'm sure, but I think that that really cheapens the complexity of our human experience. And to say that everybody cheats as a justification for being open, that really flattens all of that nuance. I think it not just flattens the nuance, it could I feel like I could see that even being used as a tool for manipulation. It's much better that we do it this way in the daylight than doing it, behind the scenes in the dark. And again, irony of ironies, people cheat in open relationships too. I remember, I think it was probably about 2 years ago now, I wanna say, one of my girlfriends was in an open relationship and they broke up, and she said it was because he cheated, and I was like, "What the heck do you mean? I thought you were in an open relationship." And she's like, "I know. He still found a way to cheat." So this is not it's not a structure issue. It's not monogamy versus polyamory. It's a people issue. It's a thing that we have to work on. I feel like it would be more advantageous rather than try and exclusively change the relationship model. It would be more advantageous to go in and look at the reasons we just listed, see what connects, and then work to build your emotional intelligence and your more alignment to yourself and your needs and your desires. It's great to be honest with each other, but you also need to be really honest with yourself if it's going to work, I think. So yeah.
With this, like I had a vision, like, well, if I got rid of everybody else, then potentially I could accelerate the possibility of being with Vylana.
If you had to distill this series down to just one word to explain what all of this had been about, I believe that word would be language. This whole thing seems to always come back to the way language is being used, massaged, wielded. This sentence that he says here, if I got rid of everybody else, that bothered me the first time I watched this. That really stuck in my teeth. And then going back again and watching it for the second time, it bothers me even more because it's that thing again of being dismissive, depersonalizing, total avoidance of responsibility. Really, what he should have been saying here is if I left my fiance, Whitney, and broke up any relationships that I had with other women at the time, then I would be free to pursue Vailana. If I happened to hear about this episode and I was one of those everybody else's and I heard that sentence, I mean, that would sting. I feel like that would really hurt my feelings, to be honest. It's not a very nice thing to say at all.
And so much love and passion and so much beauty that's come in, and we start the process of exploring. And that exploring, certainly brought up a lot of different things for you. And I'd love for you now to pass it over for you to start telling the story here from your perspective, because particularly, as Mark was saying, you had never really experienced a relationship that was in truth and integrity all the way. And so go through.
So now that the men have finished talking, the women are allowed to speak.
And shame and lying and betrayal. So my, physical body has had a whole lifetime of a lot of trauma around that particular, like a lot of things in relationship, like there being something that was hidden. There was always something that was hidden, like I would feel like this was a beautiful relationship and we're deeply in love and all these things. And then there was like something that would just come out of left field and just like totally take my legs out from under me because there was something that was hidden. And so I stepped into our relationship, knowing the sensitivity around like my animal body and my desire at that point to just really desiring to feel a sense of safety. I'd never known safety.
Vailana begins here by talking about her body in the third person. It sounds like it's her physical body, her animal body, that has the sensitivity and the trauma, but not Vailana, which already feels like it's describing some kind of split or fragmentation, as a separation between her body and her mind or her heart there. And I also have some questions here about Vailana's need to be on the inside with Aubrey when their desires appear to be in direct opposition to each other. And that's not necessarily a problem by itself. I truly believe that in most situations, things can be negotiated in a relationship so you can get to a place where both people are happy. Pressing edges in a relationship is also not necessarily a bad thing because they can put us outside of our comfort zone and that can help us grow. It's just that something really feels off about this and the way she's describing it. And I guess what I'm curious about here is Aubrey's need to keep pushing Vailana, even though he knows that she desires safety. And I'm really curious about Vailana's need to keep following Aubrey when she knows that she desires safety. Because I think if we're going to, invite Aubrey to reflect on his role and responsibility, then we need to extend that same courtesy to Vailana also.
It's like a diamond that's been constantly forged over and over and over and over through the fire, but the fire is the truth. The fire is this paradox that I'm actually the most safe because there is nothing hiding in the shadows that's left to bite me. And now that doesn't make it easy, and we'll continue to progress through the story, but like it's been the most difficult.
That part sounded really weird to me. The first time I heard it and the second time when I went back, because the way I interpret that, what I hear is the absolute worst that could possibly happen in a relationship has happened. So I'm safe, I'm free because it can't get any worse than this. There's nothing left to bite me because I've been bitten, I've been eaten up by all the things already. And call me crazy, but that doesn't sound like a really wonderful relationship to be a part of. That doesn't feel like it's describing something mutually healthy and nourishing, and I mean, she says that it's really beautiful and freeing, but I just don't know how exactly, but it could be that we just have very different definitions of what safety means. I've been with my partner for going on 8 years now, and one of the many, many things that I hold dear about him is that he is just as solid as a rock. You know, my nervous system is always really relaxed around him. And when I first met him, I was super guarded. I was really defensive, like all of the time. But over the years, I've actually been able to soften a lot, and he's helped me with that. In part, it's because he's actually really good at being able to catch in a moment and say, or being able to catch me in a moment and say, put your fist down. It's okay. You're okay. I'm okay. We're okay. You know, this is what's happening. I'm not trying to fight you. And that helps me sort of manage the fight or flight response that I'm having because I've just been triggered by something. And also what has helped me to really soften a lot, it's not just that on its own, it's his actions always match his words. One of his values is my word is my bond. And also, I'm free to say no. You know, I can say no, and that's the end of it. That's enough. And because of things like this, I feel like I've really been able to grow and to mature the parts of myself that were frozen. And it was those immature parts that were really defensive or creating a lot of defensiveness and need for self-protection. I'm really, really happy to be able to say I'm actually so stoked to be able to say this, that I'm not the person that I was 8 years ago, which is wonderful, and, uh, I owe a big part of that to our relationship, you know, to my relationship with my partner and how nurturing and wonderful it's been. You know, neither of us are the same people, and it's nice to be able to look back and go, "Yeah, gee, I'm really glad that we're different now, that things have changed," and to be happy with where we've arrived. And I bring all of this up only to reflect on the concept of safety and what it might look like or feel like or sound like. And the way that Bailana describes it, the language she uses, her posture, her tone, it doesn't come across as to me as conveying a very strong sense of contentment or groundedness. I do wonder if poly is a good option for her now. You know, maybe this really has become a choice that works for her, but I just wonder at what cost?
Like an equal, like I haven't had a natural inclination towards desiring other men. That's not really been true for me. So it's also not an equal, like you give me this, and it's not like
Right.
this there's a reciprocity of energy in the ways that he loves me is different, and
Right.
I've had to kind of overcome these things in my mind of feeling like this should be equal, because if I give this, and I think that I think a lot of relationships get stuck in that. It's like, what do I get? Which was a frame that was really helpful that
Yeah.
you've offered to me, and I also just want to give the context that
The reciprocity of energies. I would have loved some concrete examples here so that it doesn't feel like we're quite so open to bypassing or manipulation. Also, at this point, Vailana credits Gaffney with helping her to frame that even though she doesn't want to be poly, Aubrey gives back to her in other ways. And considering everything that we've learned, I find that to be really quite unsettling. I mean, it is very true that transactional relationships don't work. And actually, that's the thing. That's the thing. Gaffney, again, like it's that moment of he can take something that is actually true and then spin it into something else, maneuver it into a different position. Because if one person or both people in the relationship are keeping score, keeping tally, it absolutely isn't going to work. That's very, very true. But giving up your values for the sake of the other person is a very different thing. So, a story or two here to back up the argument would have made it much more compelling, particularly as that's the whole point of this, right? Is to reveal the model and then demonstrate how it works. So, what would have been good to know is, well, we know what Vailana is doing to me, Aubrey, But what is Aubrey doing to meet Vailana? Personally, I would have loved to have heard at this point some gratitude from Aubrey for Vailana, or at any point through this, some gratitude for Vailana, because it sounds like she has gone above and beyond for this man. And him and Aubrey taking a moment to fill her cup back up by saying, what an amazing wife I have. How lucky am I to have this beautiful, gorgeous woman who is, willing to meet me and keep growing and rolling with the punches. Whatever he wanted to say there, that would have felt like reciprocity, but the silence is also saying something, I feel. And actually, at this point, I think what might be a nice side quest to make is to look at some green flags in relationships. We're all relatively familiar with red flags, being able to identify those. But I mean, it's true. Sometimes we do wonder, hang on, is this going really well? It feels really good. Is this normal? Is this great? And it's just as important to be able to identify red flags as it is green flags, because being able to notice green flags that are present or absent will also tell you something about the relationship. I'm not a relationship coach or a relationship psychologist or a psychologist at all. So I've borrowed some points from Dr. Nicole LePera to guide us through this. If you're not familiar with her, she's also known as the holistic psychologist, and she's fantastic. She has great books and resources available online if anybody wants to check her out. So, here are some green flags for healthy relationships. In a healthy relationship, you'll notice a lot of transparency, not oversharing, but also not withholding, just a comfortableness, being open, and safety to drop your guard. They are considerate of your needs. Their actions match their words and their values. They have integrity and they are consistent. They have flexibility and they're willing to compromise because they're not trying to control you. They have a lot of empathy and they can put themselves in your shoes and you can put yourself in their shoes. They are respectful of your boundaries and your limits, and they accept them without needing to try and talk you out of them. And they don't try to one up you. I can say from my own experience that consistency and words matching actions and values has been absolutely integral to building a feeling of safety in my relationship. I grew up in a chaotic home, I had an alcoholic parent. So, being in a stable relationship where I know what to expect because my partner, he's consistent and he always honors his word, that has been healing in the most surprising and unexpected ways and so grounding and so soothing. What I'll add there though, to be really fair, is that the safety, it doesn't live exclusively in him because of his actions. It's also something that I have to participate in to help us co-create that safety, because I also need to make him feel safe, right? That's how we build a really beautiful home together. And so for me, that has looked like needing to take the risk to trust him and to give him the benefit of the doubt, and also to do the work on myself and learn how to identify my triggers so that I can work with them and be more responsive as opposed to reactive. So again, in fairness, if I'm going to talk about, being with a safe person, I feel like it's only fair to then reflect on, am I also being a safe person or creating the opportunity for safety to grow and to flourish in the relationship.
Working with Mark as our teacher to learn Dharma. And I also just want to give the context that, we started working with Mark as our teacher to learn Dharma, and then, found ourselves with you being the main person that we come to whenever we have struggles in our relationship. When Alana came into the picture, like, you have been such a necessary anchor to us being able to sit here right now. So in the same way, just really wanting to honor and recognize, I cannot see a way that we could be sitting here right now without you.
Yeah.
This point, I don't know what it is about it, but it just sticks out to me now. It didn't the first time, but it did the second time around. I'm just really curious about, why did Gaffney become the main person they come to with their relationship struggles when Alana came in? That seems to be the crucial moment there.
Or, eventually, and we'll get to this part of the story, but there's a lot of men who pretend that they're in a place where they can bless their women to do the same things that they do. And then when it comes down to actually ante up the chips on the table, the hand gets a little shaky, right? And the cards fold. And, Vi.
Okay, this one I'm just going to straight up call bullshit on. You are absolutely allowed to change your mind. That's super okay. We're human. It happens. It's no big deal. But this framing is so hypocritical given that this was Aubrey not so many years ago.
Back at your period of non-monogamy now as a happily married man, woman of your dreams, does that reframe that sort of experience? Do you have a different sort of view of non-monogamy generally now? Was it just part of a journey? Where's your headspace at with that?
It was definitely part of a journey. It was definitely part of like a deep learning practice. I mean, we all have jealousy to a certain extent. It's just inherent. And if you think you're not jealous, I dare you to get into a non-monogamous relationship where your sweetheart is getting fucked by somebody else and you're home alone and just imagining what's happening. Like, if you can do that, like, fucking get an ashram somewhere. Like, I don't know what it takes to be able to handle that, but and drama in that period. But it was honest. The thing about it is that it was honest. We told each other everything, everything that happened. We told each other the truth, but I could never quite do it. I wasn't up to the task. And that doesn't mean that somebody else can't be. I gave it my best, and with all of my tools, all of my consciousness, all of my love, I couldn't do it. And so with that knowledge, then, I met Vailana, and Vailana, immediately I'd been in love with her for a little while, and we could tell that story if we like, but I'd been through the polyamory journey. So when I met Vailana, I was like, I'm not doing that again. I'm not doing that again.
So moving on. So far, the story is quite interesting. We have two people with different desires and relationship values coming together. But they're deeply in love, so they want it to work out. And then a man enters their life who wants to change the story of the world. He wants to expand love through relationships, and he becomes their mentor. And then a new goddess enters the field.
Vi, although it hasn't been the richness and depth and love that I've shared with Alana, also had that moment where she had a lovership and she got to watch me, put my chips unflinchingly on the table, actually be her wingman, help her make this connection with someone she was interested in, someone I play ball with who thought, this is a good man. And she got to watch me bless her in this path. And I think that's also important.
My God. That little dig at Vailana there, my love with Alana is greater than your fling. And then pirouetting into how awesome is it that you got to watch me help you take a lover, even though I know very well that you never wanted a lover and wanted to be monogamous in our marriage. That's so awesome for you, babe, to be with somebody as awesome as me. I mean, cool, well done. Good for you.
This is just the name we're calling it, and that'll be a perfect time to go to the next. We've given this a name. We're calling it Radical Monogamy in the field of erotic mystics. So paradoxically, this is not about polyamory. That's the paradox. It's actually about radical monogamy, meaning deep, exclusive, lifelong, committed relationship, right? But not in the classical monogamous sense. It's an expanded monogamy. But there's a radical monogamy, but it's just not a monogamy of two. It's a slightly bigger monogamy. But it's not, okay, we're not like moving in and out of part.
Big moment. We finally get the name drop. Watching this was very different for me this time. If you watched the Radical Monogamy episode before you came to the series, I would be so keen to hear, what are you seeing this time? Are your thoughts, feelings, perspectives changing? What's new for you? What's present for you as you watch this? I can say for myself, the first time that I watched this, I was confused. I felt somewhat gaslit. I Mostly though, I felt this big, like, disbelief. I felt flabbergasted because it looked to me like we were watching the birth of a cult, except that they don't realize that that's what's happening in this conversation. Because I don't think that if you're genuinely trying to start a cult that you would make a podcast episode like this, because it feels so glaring and obvious that there's something weird about it. But now that I watch it the second time, I feel like that yes, we could potentially be watching the birth of a cult here, but 3 people don't realize that's happening. One person is maybe cunning enough to have a sense of what could come from a configuration like this, from a mission like this. So now coming back to it, there is a part of me that feels just fascinated and maybe even somewhat amused, but definitely fascinated. I feel like I kind of have a sense of like, I get it. Like, there's something pathological. When it comes to Gaffney, I'm not really that surprised anymore that he could make polyamory sound like monogamy to a person. Imagine this. Okay, so you're very strong, you're very confident, and you have this beautiful relationship that you love, you're married, your husband is wonderful, and then you both start working with a spiritual mentor, and your husband is obsessed with this mentor. He thinks this mentor is the bee's knees. And this mentor gives you both a radical mission to be outrageous lovers. And you're intelligent and you're capable, but maybe you've also gotten used to having your boundaries pushed. So you don't notice the gentle manipulation of words. And then you're in a crisis. The rug gets pulled out from under you. You desperately want to stay in your relationship because the love is real, but maybe things have just they might finally have gone too far. And then your spiritual mentor steps in. While you are in your most vulnerable state, full of self-doubt, he whispers that you can have anything that you want. You already have everything that you want. You've just been looking at it the wrong way. And you're going to help change the world with your love, and your children with your man are going to change the world. So then you start to come around. And got a little bit heavy. It's a little bit of a bummer right now. At the end of the day, we all want to be seen and chosen. We're all just humans doing the best that we can. I think a lot of this makes sense to some degree, and I mean, I guess I just want to say, I really do hope that this is useful to someone, to anyone, and if you see yourself anywhere in this series, that you reach out to a crisis line, a professional, a trusted friend or family member to get the support that you really need.
Who challenged the war and he did the Pentagon Papers. It was the big explosion in the 60s. So Daniel was actually in this exact configuration in his life, relationally. And, I knew his sister-in-law, Barbara Marcus Hubbard, very well, and his wife then, Patricia Ellsberg. And, Daniel and I met with him. We sat and chatted before he died. And had he not had this configuration, he said he couldn't have done anything. He couldn't have stood in integrity. He couldn't have been in his aliveness. He couldn't have had fought the battles that needed to be fought.
So that's one of those, what I think are one of those gentle reminders that if you want to change the world or do great things like Daniel Ellsberg, then you better not be in a monogamous relationship.
Different configurations. Our friend Paul Check is in a kind of, post-classical configuration. And there's a wonderful book by Rofi called Uncommon Arrangements. And it's about the greatest people in history, 8 stories, all of which what she calls uncommon arrangements. And when we allow for uncommon arrangements, something beautiful emerges.
And then again here, we have that reinforcing reminder with the book about the greatest people in history who, funnily enough, were not in monogamous relationships, weirdly.
I would love to, sorry to interrupt. I would love to be able to speak to that, because for me, in my experience in my lovership, there was such a depth and a richness to it and so much perspective, and I couldn't move forward. I know this is like interrupting the conversation, but I just wanted to sort of land that, because that felt really true. But like there was a really deep depth and richness that I would love to, bring a lot of love and light to. And
okay, I'm just popping this part in here because I thought it was really funny. Vailana's competitiveness won't let Aubrey get away with dismissing her lovership as being less valuable than his love with Alana. And yay, you go, girl. So that was cool.
More, and just not really honestly being in kind of a place of being really lost. And I had a friend who was like, just download Raya and just talk to people, because it's so not my pace to online date and just be in that exploration. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then the next day was when I got your message. So, and also for most of my life, I've really had the beautiful opportunity of having synchronicity.
Okay, this next part is not funny at all.
So for our second date, we share with Alana that Vailana and I had been developing, what we really believe is a lineage medicine practice that we call the God Bomb. And there's, to guide you through this process. And you're like, yeah, let's go. And we're like, really? For sure?
Wow, she really trusts.
I was like, for sure, really?
Like, we're good and we deserve the trust, but like, you also just met her. I mean, I know we're great, but.
Yeah. So like, good read of character in that, and good discretion. And so you show up for ceremony. It's not a ceremony that you're familiar with.
I've heard different information about what this God Bomb is. What is consistent is that it's described involving psychedelics. It's just the psychedelic itself that has a little bit of ambiguity around it. If you have a clearer picture, please drop a comment so we can have a full understanding. Also, so I can apologize if I've got this whole thing wrong. I've done my own healing work with psychedelics, and I've been an integration guide for half a decade now, but I'm not anybody fancy. I'm not a facilitator. I'm not a shaman. My common sense tells me, though, that what Aubrey and Bailana describe here, in no way it sounds to me like ethical facilitation. Bailana at least has enough maturity to understand the gravity of the choice that Alana is making, bearing in mind that when this took place, I believe Alana is only 25, 26-ish, so she's quite young, especially in comparison to Aubrey and Bailana. And even though to some degree Bailana seems able to recognize the choice that Alana is making, there's still a lot of blind spots here. I mean, the first big thing is, why was this offered as a second date? Sincerely, what was the intention there? Because I really question the judgment of somebody who thinks that that is appropriate. And then another question I would have is, was this sacred or recreational? Because I feel like those are different things. And a medicine woman I worked with once, she said that nothing is sacred these days because everything is easy. For her, something becomes sacred through effort and care and sacrifice and intentional practice. It's something that you earn or you work for. Like, for example, the willingness before a ceremony to fast and prepare your body and your mindset and to sacrifice something, like using alcohol and cannabis before you go into the medicine. And I would agree with that. I don't believe that sacred things are cheap in the sense that they should cost time and energy and effort, and you should be sacrificing some kind of short-term pleasure for, your long-term growth and rewards. I think also that what consenting adults do with their consciousness is entirely their right. If it's for fun, have fun. For me, just don't pretend. Don't make it out to be something that it's not. What alarms me is the rise of performative spirituality, which really seems to water down things that used to be sacred, like plant medicines or another person's consciousness. And as facilitators, the ethical lines here are messy at best. I mean, was there a vetting process? Was there adequate preparation? It sounds like Alana didn't even fully understand what it was that she was stepping into. And she shared that she had been feeling lost. She was going through a breakup. So she was clearly in a vulnerable state. And then here come two much older, more experienced figures inviting her into a psychedelic ceremony as a second date. The container that she's stepping into is just insane to me because it's charged with intimate and romantic undertones. It was not a neutral space, and these were not neutral facilitators. One of them was still navigating the emotional challenges of opening up a marriage that she preferred to keep closed. The other was obviously sexually attracted to her. And after this profound journey, Alana moves from this deeply altered state to intense love bombing, and all this really abstract talk about her purity. The whole situation, it just makes me feel super uncomfortable, and it really just feels like a misuse of medicine. And remember in our last chat about erotic transference, a situation like this is right for erotic transference. To me, Aubrey's intention, it just doesn't seem thoughtful or mature, and I don't say that to throw shade. This feels like it was more of an attempt to impress, like, kind of like what little kids do when they're peacocking with their toys. It's like there was a more really immature part coming forward, and Vailana is a woman with agency who could see Alana's naivety, but does she attempt to slow it down? Does she maybe say like, "Hey guys, what if we go for miniature golf instead, and we'll do this, like, a little bit later when we talk about it more?" And speaking of the way they talk about it, they act like this is normal or even admirable, and that feels really problematic. I mean, I'm glad that Alana was safe, and to be fair, I have no doubt that she would have been physically safe in this situation, but this sort of thing, it so often goes sideways, and there's zero acknowledgement of from from Vailana or Aubrey about the responsibility that they hold. I feel like the way this would have been shared if they were safe practitioners, it would have sounded something like, "Okay, this isn't something that we ordinarily do, but after carefully checking with Alana what was her experience with medicines, when was her last ceremony, what, if any, medication she was on, after we really thoroughly informed her of the process and informed her of any risks involved, and we made sure that she had a support network to lean on, so if she became destabilized afterwards, she would still be okay. Then we decided to make an exception because, for this reason. And then we established really clear boundaries. So this was not going to be a date. We talked about consent for touch and for energy work, and we because we really wanted to make sure that she was completely comfortable. And then we also agreed that we were not going to have any romantic contact for at least 2 weeks after the ceremony to give time and space for her to integrate without muddying the waters. That would have been much better. I still feel inappropriate, but certainly much more it would have conveyed a deeper understanding of what you were doing and the responsibility that you hold. This, however, is just a casual story of dosing somebody on a second date, and that is wildly irresponsible to me. I can see it's because I can see that the careless way that they've shared this could so easily confuse men and women who have been hurt or been taken advantage of during ceremonies, and it could give fake shamans permission to keep doing what they're doing because, look, see, this sort of thing is totally normal. Just in the space between this episode airing and now, I know of 2 women who have been psychologically and sexually harmed by shamans using psychedelics. But if you're watching this, well, you might be thinking, what happened to me wasn't super far away from this, and they're all okay, so I guess I'm okay, and this is actually a normal thing and everything's fine. And it's not. It's so not cool.
In that period of the pre-tragic, we're like, this is fucking awesome. And then, of course, as with all stories, the pre-tragic moves into the tragic. And you've heard us talk about this on many podcasts. But, Mark, if you want to I'll turn it over to you rather than.
The last third of the video is really just full of spiritual abstraction. I want to say nonsense, but I'm going to choose to say abstraction.
The pre-tragic, tragic, and the post-tragic is just so crazy helpful to understand life. So the pre-tragic, as we've all done deep dives in, the pre-tragic is clarity. You're ecstatic, it's clear. Let's say in the realm of love, which is one of like 60 examples of the pre-tragic, but in a vector of love. I'm madly in love. Love conquers all. My beloved.
Pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic. Basically, what it boils down to is we are happy and feeling good in our relationship, and then we have a problem. And sometimes people try to sweep that problem under the rug, but it comes back. So then you have a problem or a tragic again. So you have to realize that you can't sweep it under the rug and you need to stop avoiding it and work it out. Or you just simply decide to work it out the first time around. I mean, it's not really fancy. There's not really anything like groundbreaking about that. I feel like you could understand that just by watching an episode of couples therapy. Oh, actually, okay. If you want a really, really intriguing side quest, watch the first episode of season 4 of couples therapy. Then you're going to see a really, really great example of heart-centered healing within a polyamorous relationship. It's 3 people who are in a pretty similar configuration trying to work it out, trying to really learn how to love each other better. And the irony is that one of them had cheated. But I digress. So, essentially, from what I understand from Gaffney's framework, is that conflict is romanticized using mythological storytelling, and I think that in turn diminishes the value of really complex human emotions. And it also seems to be, this kind of reminder to them again that pain has a purpose because they are, or their pain has a purpose because they are part of these bigger mythological narratives. It's also a really handy tool for when you want to dance around an issue or you just want to avoid bearing the consequences of your actions because the language separates you from the events. So listen to this and notice what you hear in the contrast. We were in the tragic trying to find our way back to the pre-tragic. As opposed to, she wasn't talking to me because I said some wild shit and we kept fighting about it. Which one do you feel, what is the utility of both of those statements, and which do you feel would help you arrive at a positive resolution for everybody involved more smoothly and a little faster? Not even saying that either of those are the only 2 options, but just in this example, what do you notice there? What is the function of both of those, the purpose, how could they be used, and which one ultimately do you feel would be more effective in resolving conflict in a relationship?
I receive a message as clear as any message I've ever received, and it felt to me coming through the voice of Isis. She didn't announce herself, but that was implicit in my understanding, and it's almost telekinetic understanding. And it says, you need to have children with both of them.
Isis. Oh boy. The big Isis moment. I mean, so much has been said about this already because in the critical feedback when this first aired, this was a massive piece of the backlash and sparked a lot of controversy. What's up for debate here is, where did the voice come from? Is self-deception at play? Did Aubrey's own desires speak to him and in the moment he just mistook that for the goddess? And what about Isis? Is anybody familiar with this goddess? I only have a very basic understanding of her role in Egyptian mythology, and based on what I can remember, I I do feel like this is a bit out of character for her. I don't recall her being an archetype or a figure that would go to a man and say, "This is what you should be doing with a woman's body." But if you know, pop some info in the if you know, pop some info in the comments and we can chat about it.
Enter this one dark chamber. And I'm in there in the dark chamber.
It was the Holy Polies.
The Holy of Holies, like the saint.
And degradation. It was a lot more extreme than I could handle, and sometimes I would try and stop it and say, Mike, I actually don't enjoy it when you call me a whore. And he would say, don't be so unsophisticated. We're in the Holy of Holies here. I'm giving you a transmission from the divine feminine. Now tell me you're a slut. Say it. My insides would be all knotted. Don't you wish he was your spiritual teacher? Yeah.
Okay, this one, I'm not even really exactly sure what it is or what to do with it. But when I watched Donna's full story that first time, and she says that, it took me right back to Vailana in this moment, like immediately transported me there. And there feels like there's some overlap or connection. And maybe, and not just because of the obvious, like the similarities in language, but it's more why does that language feel similar or feel familiar? Maybe it's because just the way it sits with me when I notice that so much of Gaffney's language, like if you listen, you hear it in the people that Gaffney is involved with, which is not unusual. We all start to pick up each other's, particularly speech habits when we're close to somebody. But there was just something about that really, it was visceral. Like I found it very disturbing.
Like I was just like, my heart sank into my belly and I was like, fuck. So I quietly exit the Holy of Holies and find some place where I could look out at the water and just go like, what the fuck was that? Because I knew that was not the covenant that I'd made with Vi that brought her in. That was not when I got down on my knee and proposed. That was not part of the plan. And so now I was in this tragic place of complexity where I just received what I felt like was a clarification.
Okay, so again, this is another moment where I just want to be super direct because the spiritual bypassing is frustrating and my patience at this point is very thin. So Aubrey, I mean, he does at least acknowledge that a birth doesn't have to mean a literal child, and he tried to figure out what it could be. How much effort he actually put into that, I don't know. I don't get the sense that there was a lot of thought. It feels more like he just took very seriously, like, yeah, I'm gonna have to have babies with everybody. Um, but what bothers me also is there's no point here where he just says, "You know what? I perceived that the truth what of this transmission of what conveyed to me is that I need and I also want to have children with both of these women." So there's just a big lack of ownership and everything is kind of being skirted around because the transmission is between him and everybody else. You can kind of just sort of duck and hide behind it. He doesn't have to be accountable for his actions. He doesn't have to be accountable for the way that he conveyed this transmission and this information. And what's devastating in this part is that Vailana, she can't even look at Alana, and no one tries to comfort her when she cries.
Taken that road or even hinted at it is like a shocking testament to a purity that is, it's really like transcendent of what I've known in the world. And that purity that is a part of your essential quality. I was just talking with Mark about this in the car, is like people who, if you don't have an experience of purity.
Purity conversation is a little, ugh, I don't have anything really objective or useful to say about this. I will say that, I mean, how shameless to sit beside your wife who has done nothing but express her devotion and how hard she has worked to be what you need, and who, in her words, has died so many times she can't even count anymore just to love you the way that you want to be loved. And then you talk across her about another woman's purity and all of the archetypal whatnots that arouses in you. I mean, it's just awkward to watch, but there's also the description of purity. There's something about it that the only word that comes into my mind is gross. Like it just, I don't know. I just don't love that.
Myself. And it was torturous because it's so not who I am. And I think it's important to speak into the space of like,
Beautiful.
You can look at it as me, submitting myself to his desire, but I would love for you to speak to
It's
the
beautiful.
unique sacrifice.
Yeah, and we've talked on Aubrey, we've talked about this so much, and Alana and Vi, and it's just true for all of us. We all have a unique risk, and my unique risk is not Aubrey's, or Alana's or Vi's, and we also have a unique sacrifice. But sacrifice, and I love the distinction that we've made together. We can never abandon ourselves.
The unique sacrifice. This is also something, there's so many things that bothered me. This is something else that bothered me a lot. And I have a lot of questions about what's going on here. So Gaffney makes the statement, we can never abandon ourselves. That's how he gets Vailana across the line. And I mean, that point was so important to Vailana and Alana as well. So it makes me wonder, is Gaffney sincere or is he just reading the room, so to speak? what does that actually mean in practice? How does Gaffney define self-abandonment? If you can't abandon yourself, then what's up with people-pleasing? What's the deal with fawning? And again, they mythologize the relationship through, the lens of the hero's journey this time. And that sucks for me because I actually really love this metaphor. It's such an awesome tool. My background's in art therapy, and it's a great exercise that I've used myself and I've used with others to help people locate themselves inside of their growth journey. But the important point to note there is it's just that, a tool. It's not supposed to support you to live in a fantasy.
Life. And of course, all of my early stories play in. But there's a moment in which, in order to be a hero, to be the hero of my own life, there's a sacrificial act. There's a reciprocity of the sacrificial in all great relationships.
And then comes the concept of right sacrifice. So it's framed as sacred and mystical, but there's no clear definitions, there's no parameters. It's really fluid and it can be shaped to mean anything depending on your agenda or the context. And because it's undefined, it's really hard to challenge. It's like trying to push back on smoke. And when you're pouring, like what I'm curious about is, okay, if you're pouring all of your aliveness into a mission or into a relationship, at what point are you allowed to ask, is this also serving me? And where are the breaks? Because if you ask that question, when do you get to hit those breaks and say, no, it's not anymore? This sort of smoky, ever moving, ever changing concept that they have here, it feels like it could push you on and on and on forever, indefinitely. And it's a little bit another one of those things where we take something that is true and then we sort of maneuver it in a particular way, or we may just stretch it until it's completely opaque. Because it is true that in healthy relationships, there is an element of sacrifice required. And it does mean giving something up for the benefit of the other person or for a shared goal. Some examples, so that could mean, quitting smoking. It could mean letting your mother-in-law move in with you. It could mean exploring being in an open relationship, for sure. But if sacrifice comes at the cost of your identity, your values, or your self-worth, it's not noble and it's not healthy. I think it would be helpful to create some contrast and a positive framework for communication in a relationship when we're trying to, navigate these differences. Chris Voss is a former FBI hostage negotiator, and he's amazing. I love him actually. And he has a really insightful intake on compromise. So he teaches communication through active listening, and he's also not a fan of compromise. He has a book called Never Split the Difference. Why? Because he believes that in a compromise, both people walk away only half satisfied. So his his suggestion instead is to get really curious about what's going on for the other person. His framework requires a whole ton of empathy. Put yourself on the other person's shoes, and then they pay you the same respect and try to see things through your eyes. And then when we can genuinely understand what's going on for the other person, then we can co-create something that serves both people. And to me, that's what love with integrity really feels like.
Many people in the last couple of weeks, when I mentioned that I was going to do this podcast, they said, "Don't do that. That's just too controversial." And of course, I've avoided all controversy in my life, so I certainly wouldn't want to step into it. But the truth is that
At this point, everybody in that room has the time and the resources available to them to do their own research. Gaffney giggling about his not being controversial could be a joke about anything, but we know the main things that we know his main controversies, so that giggle is dark and unappreciated.
Of the time in that lovership that you're with, it was that. Vi would come back more alive
Yeah.
and be a better version of herself. And then it would be more ecstatic on the reunion. And Alana exploring and figuring things out. And it was exciting. And then ultimately her saying, I don't know necessarily that I'm better from this. And her saying, okay, I'll wait and I'll explore and feel. But I think, for all of those, the men are out there like, oh,
The Radical podcast leaves me with quite a few questions. Questions like, why does it feel like the women are being subtly pushed to love each other? There seems to me to be an emphasis on Vailana and Alana being deeply in love. And I mean, it feels like it's really important for the model, maybe even necessary, but is it authentic or is it forced? And if it's forced, why? And does this model foster love or does it foster enmeshment? How is Gaffney showing up in this conversation and what does his presence mean for the group? My sense overall is that Aubrey quickly latched onto Gaffney's narrative about changing the world because that story gave him, and I think it also serves Gaffney too, a feeling of noble purpose. You know, they get to cast themselves as these misunderstood heroes, the warrior poet and the mystic, the great mystic. It's almost medieval, you know, there's kind of like a King Arthur and Merlin vibe coming through, like they're taking on the world. And in practice, though, Gaffney feels like he comes across more as Mordred or Sauron, and Aubrey, I mean, I'm not quite sure what to make of him in all honesty, because there are definitely echoes of Donna and Lisa in the words that he says, and it feels like he really does want to be King Arthur, but, well, if anybody's a Guy Ritchie fan, it seems like he's showing up more as King Vortigern. Gaffney, in this situation, he seems to gain clout and credibility through Aubrey's platform, and I would imagine that there are also some financial benefits for Gaffney. And in return, Aubrey inherits a mythic mission and a spiritual why to help frame his choices. I think, in my opinion, what I'm seeing also is Gaffney is there to co-sign Aubrey's choices, and he gives them weight in with his spiritual authority. By the time we arrive at the Radical Monogamy uh, podcast, the mission of saving the world, it seems to have become the foundation for everything. And I think that begs the question, if you removed God or the mission or the higher purpose from this, would Vailana and Alana be making the same choices? And maybe they would. You know, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I mean, again, maybe Vailana has genuinely discovered that poly works for her and this is a good way for her to move forward. But the idea of changing the world seems to have become the lens through which all decision making is made. So I think it would be a useful thought experiment to see what happens if you remove that, what you are left with, what's left behind. And I mean, I'm also curious, what do you think you would do in this situation? How do you think you would respond? Personally, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I know what I would like to believe that I would do, but in action, I think the only thing I can say for sure is that I would hope that my girlfriends would knock some sense into me if I wasn't seeing clearly. Through it all, this whole series, the whole point has been to give a voice to those who've been hurt, but not just the women who made allegations against Mark Gaffney, but all the men and the women who have been taken advantage of, but maybe they've had to remain silent or they weren't able to take action. My hope is that you can feel seen and heard and that we can grow together and we can become stronger in our boundaries and in our love and in our ability to serve not just the metaphorical feminine or masculine, but the real men and women and children and teens in our lives. And that brings me to my final point, which it is a heavy one. I believe that at the end of the day, this is no longer just about what Aubrey's role in the constellation or their relationship with Gaffney or Gaffney's relationship with them, which is what has been given the bulk of the attention, you know, in this series and also in the public discourse. I do believe enough has been said now and enough has come to light that this can no longer rest solely on Aubrey's shoulders. Vailana and Alana also share responsibility because they are choosing to follow the guidance of Mark Gaffney. They have the ability to do their own due diligence. They are grown women with agency. And as women who have both spoken about their desire to become mothers, recognizing the weight that choice carries really matters. because it comes with a unique kind of responsibility. To all of the courageous survivors that I've known and worked with, those who are healing from CSA, I want to give light to something that I've heard come up way too many times now, many times, too many times. And that's that it's often easier to make peace with the abuse than it is with the betrayal of not being protected by the people who should have known better, particularly their mothers. And yes, that's a very heavy truth, but it's not nearly as heavy as the lifelong consequences for children and teens whose parents stay in denial, silence their instincts, and look the other way. And I'm not talking about random acts of violence that are unpreventable. I'm talking about church deacons, babysitters, uncles, step parents, beloved spiritual leaders, the people in our communities and our circles who have reputations, or there's a feeling and that feeling is ignored. In the healing journey from CSA, and quite honestly, anything that gives you a high ACE score, there comes a really beautiful moment, a moment that I think arrives for most people who are in it doing the work. And it's when you realize that you've become, or you are becoming, the safe person that you would have needed when you were a child. So the question that I would like to put on the table is this: are you the safe person you would have needed when you were little? If your child self saw you coming, would they be filled with joy and trust? Great, amazing examples of that kind of love and courage, I think, show up in Sarah Kabakov and Judy Mitzner and Haya and Donna and Lisa. These women who are standing up not for a metaphor, but for real living, breathing people. And I think you can see it too in the countless men and women who showed up in the comment section offering thoughtful, heart-centered, passionate feedback. Spaces like the comment section, I think we all know it's usually a red hot mess, but I was so shocked and surprised because this time I feel like I genuinely saw something different. I saw care, I saw discernment, and I saw a real sense of community. And let's not forget also that true strength isn't always loud, and funnily enough, it's not always visible on social media. It's also found in the quiet acts of listening, comforting, and just standing by one another. You know, it's in the brave choices people make every day without applause or recognition, all the conversations that are taking place offline. And to all of you who spoke up and shared your wisdom or simply held space for somebody else, I want to say thank you. I'm deeply grateful. For whatever it's worth, watching people stand up for each other it really meant more than I can say. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on this journey and sharing your time and your compassion and your wisdom. Stay safe, stay discerning, and stay rooted in a love that doesn't ask you to leave yourself behind. All of the usual YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, and I'm hoping to see you all again in some future videos. Take care.